and I'm on the board. I gotta put got it. Okay, I got it. I'm the director for Action and Advocacy on the state board. So I get to participate in all the legislative stuff, which is for me really great fun. So we're going to start out. You want to put the first slide up, Andrea? Okay. I'm going to start out talking a little bit about general things that happened during the legislature. The slides are not necessarily in the same order as I'm going to talk about them, nor are they totally the same. I'm going to cover a little bit more than what is on the slides. So the legislature started in January, which they usually do, but they recessed shortly afterwards. And they were hoping that the COVID restrictions would ease, and that giving them another month might help so that they can continue their business in a way that was more conducive to legislative work. So they worked informally for about a month, meaning they didn't have any floor action or committee action. So they didn't really pass anything. They had passed a few things in the first 3 days of the session that they really needed to get done. But for a month, they didn't do much other than a lot of behind the scenes work, of course, writing bills and doing that kind of thing, and lobbying their fellow legislators on trying to get people to support what they're doing. There was a month's recess, and even though restrictions were not lifted at the end of that month, the legislature picked up where it left off in January with a deadline of June 12th. So they were allowed to not count the month that they had a recess, and they went to June 12th, or could go to June 12th instead of early May, which is what they usually do. So for those of you who might not know, the legislature has a 120-day constitutional limit on how long it can meet. So the House at the legislature has 41 Democrats and 24 Republicans, which is obviously quite a stretch, or quite a division between the two. But the Senate has 19 Democrats and 16 Republicans. So it's a little harder for legislators to work on some of their bills in the Senate because of this. We have 23 Legislative Action Committee lobbyists from the League of Women Voters that were very diligent and experts in their area. They worked very hard over this session and did a lot of good work and participated. It was a little tricky to do some of the things that they wanted to do because everything was online until the very, very end. But they did work on about 100 bills, and we'll go over some of the general categories as well as specifics for the bills that we really found important for the League. So the COVID was an undercurrent throughout the session, and restoring the cuts made in 2020 due to COVID, and deciding the use of $800 million in state recovery plan were top of the list for the Joint Budget Committee and the legislature in general. More money was available than originally anticipated, which obviously made people feel a little bit better and happy that they could fund some programs that they hadn't been able to or thought they weren't going to be able to. And a quote from Colorado Public Politics says, they were funded with dollars left over from 2019 tax receipts. The $800 million Colorado Recovery Plan stimulus package supported bills ranging from infrastructure to education to workforce revitalization. Excuse me. So this is where I'm just talking about the state surplus, the money that the state was going to use for the recovery pack. COVID in many ways pointed out the weaknesses in some of the systems in Colorado, and that was particularly true, and you probably know this, for the healthcare system. The pandemic also pointed out the inequities in the health system and other systems as well. So they were faced not only with what they generally do, but faced with a changing ground, a shaking ground that they need to deal with, and they still need to deal with it. Top of the list of issues that were addressed during the session were the economy, healthcare, gun safety, and taxes. There were winners in the natural resources with a ban on plastics, requiring building efficiency, transit and transportation. There was also more funding than before for the Colorado Water Plan, which was put into place and was relying on some tax flow. But this year there was more money to fund the plan and implement the plan. At 2 points during the legislative process, the governor specifically asked for the league position on issues. He wanted to know why the league supported House Bill 2113, the ballot transparency bill. And that bill would have made it so that the ballot title would say that, as it is now, Tabor mandates that you have to say that the bill is going to cost X dollars. And this would have said, but these X dollars go for education, roads, whatever. So people knew that the money was not just going to go away, and then there were not going to be any consequences, because there are consequences. So that was not the part of the bill that was really in question, particularly by the governor. There was also supposed to be a chart that would show income levels and say how much it would cost for the income levels. And the governor was not particularly keen on that. And he has agreed, though, to work with us and others on this bill over the interim. So hopefully we will have a repeat of this next year. The other bill was House Bill 211092. It was concerning the eligibility of a candidate for lieutenant governor to be a candidate for another elected office. This was also vetoed, in part because of comments from the League of Women Voters. It was really quite exciting for the League to be contacted directly by the governor to come and talk to him about some of the issues around things that we support and things that he wonders about. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk more specifically about two areas that I followed. One of them was higher education, and the other was redistricting. So there were about a dozen bills that were introduced on higher education, many of them on topics that were like no ACT and SAT testing for admission to colleges, take the junior out of any college's name. There was some other bonding, paying off some bonds for the area campus, some of those kinds of things. And my philosophy is generally, if it's not pretty earth-shaking, that we probably shouldn't spend our time on it because we have so many other things that we need to do. So the two bills that we followed in higher education was, the first one was 21029, Colorado American Indian Tribes in-state tuition. And this bill allows Native Americans who live elsewhere, not in Colorado, but come from a tribe that was in Colorado historically. And they will be able to gain in-state tuition. So we supported that bill, of course, and we're hopeful that we'll probably see some more Native Americans going to public institutions, and that, in my estimation, would be a good thing. The other bill that we followed was Displaced Workers Grant. That is SB 21-2332, and it provides scholarships for training for workers who have lost their job, have been displaced by the fact that the environment has changed. Let's take the energy industry as an example. Coal mining is fading out. What are the people going to do that have been working in the coal mine? And they could be retrained for solar energy jobs or wind energy, or even beyond the energy industry. So those are the two higher ed bills. They would be trained in probably two community colleges. So my favorite, Colorado redistricting. And we were very much involved in the writing of Y and C, which are the two proposals that made it to the ballot and made it through the process. And in fact, every legislator voted for putting the two proposals on the ballot. And it was about 70% of the citizens that voted for it. So it's pretty strongly in our Constitution. Two commissions were set up, one for legislature and one for the congressional representation. And I just heard 10 minutes ago or so that the Congressional Commission has submitted its preliminary map. And I think they made the new congressional district up north and maybe east of Denver. So you can go to their website and look at that to make sure that I'm correct. And you can also comment on it. And you can make suggestions about how the map should be drawn. So this is getting to be a fairly exciting period of time. We're beginning to get the nuts and bolts of the commissions. There's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of work. The people who got on the commissions are not dallying in any way. They're meeting daily. They're meeting in commission meetings, and they're meeting in subcommittee meetings. So as you probably are well aware, the time frame for the census, the US Census Bureau, to send the necessary citizen number to the states was put back significantly. And it was supposed to be, I think it was March 1st or April 1st, we were supposed to get the numbers, and we're not going to get even the numbers we really need until maybe mid-August, if then. There have been 2 dates thrown out, so it's hard to know for sure. But so we need to get down, we need the numbers from precinct block numbers so that we can count the people and put them in the right districts. So the deadline was changed, and thus this put the Colorado commissions in kind of a precarious position because they needed to get things done so that they could give the numbers in the districts to people so that people could run for office, and the timetable for all the election activity needed to be done along the lines of earlier than what we were going to be able to do. So the commission, well, the legislature itself introduced 2 different proposals. They introduced first Senate Bill 21247, and this was concerning the procedures of the Independent Redistricting Commission, and and they also introduced House Joint Resolution 211008. Now, the two of them were very similar, and they really wanted to pass the resolution, because then they could send it off to the Supreme Court and have the Supreme Court make a decision about who had the authority to change the dates that are in the Constitution. And I've just explained the reason why they have to change the dates, but the dates are in the Constitution. So they passed the resolution, and they sent the resolution to the Colorado Supreme Court, and Colorado Supreme Court, thank goodness, moved very quickly, and they stated that the independent commissions are truly independent, and they can decide what the dates are going to be. This helps in case there's some lawsuits also, that there's been some oversight by the Colorado Supreme Court. But we moved on, and we didn't need the other bill, the 247, and that was laid over until July 10th, which is a tactic that can be used by the legislature. We all know that the legislature was going to had to end by June 12th. But if they don't want to say anything really negative about a piece of legislation, they can lay it over to a time when the legislature isn't meeting, but that in essence kills the bill. So I think they had 247 just as a backup in case the Supreme Court didn't rule in a timely fashion or ruled in a different way. So the work goes on with many meetings per week. All the meetings are open to the public. Public comment is welcome. We can now begin to go in person if we wish. And we can also go online. You can spend all day. Don't want to put you off, but you could spend a long time online watching the conversations. And surprisingly enough, they're really not dull. I've been watching the data collection one, which you might think wouldn't be too exciting, but they're really grabbing at the issues, and they're really focused, and they know what they're talking about, which is kind of surprising because these people's names were pulled out of a hat. And I think the Congressional Commission is fairly representative of the state of Colorado. The one I point out all the time is the gentleman who is from Mali. He is a U.S. citizen, but and he's quite an active member and asks lots of questions and is grasping everything, and as are the others. So again, it's pretty fascinating. You need to go at least a few times to see what they're doing and how they're doing it, because we're one of the very few 5 states, I believe, at this point that have independent commissions of some kind or another. It's pretty interesting as being a role model for other states. So the League is established. I'm going to do a little advertisement here. The League has established an observer corps. And if you want the material we're using for observing, you can contact Beth Hendricks. And we're also going to have a meeting, I think July, I won't say, can't remember for sure, but that we all, are you going to chime in, Beth?
July 7th.
Okay, thank you. To talk about what people are observing and what they see and how they think things are going. So I am now going to turn this over to Andrea, who will go into more details about the pieces of legislation that were worked on this session.
All right, thank you, Toni.
Before I dive into some of the other highlights that we wanted to bring your attention to, I do just want to quickly say that this really is only a handful of the legislation that LAC worked on this year. We obviously have limited time tonight. So I don't necessarily mean to elevate some bills over others, but I just wanted to point out some of the things that we felt were definitely things that we wanted you to be aware of, things that, we put a lot of work into and paid a lot of attention to, but you can certainly check out the full scope of bills that LAC covered on the legislative report page. We have a master list that's got all of the bills that we followed this session. And then you can also check out the customized summaries that our issue area lobbyists have put together by going to the individual bill profiles, so you can see what bills were covered in a particular area. And that's all available on the legislative report website, or web page within the State League website. So just wanted to start by providing that disclaimer. So I'll pick up with our activity in the elections and voting realm. Our elections and voting team followed a whole bunch of legislation this session. But in the interest of time, I do want to focus on just a couple that we consider important and we do want people to be aware of. But I selected these because they're also measures where we were really extensively involved in the stakeholding process. In both these cases, I think for at least a couple of years. And also, I will say that all of the bills that I'm speaking about have passed. These are things that we supported, and we are very pleased with the fact that this legislation, all the legislation that I'm going to discuss, has passed. There were things that we opposed this session, but we were really excited about the things that made it through. So to start off, I want to touch on the provisions of the multilingual ballot bill. This was House Bill 1011. And it will require the Secretary of State and the county clerks to provide multilingual ballot access in counties where either 2,000 citizens or 2.5% of citizens 18 and up speak English less than very well. So the idea here is to facilitate voting amongst people who may not speak English as their first language, or not terribly comfortable with the language that appears on the ballot. So to really facilitate that process for them, reduce the need to rely on external help to actually interpret and cast a ballot, so people can do that more independently. So it's something we were very supportive of. In addition, the Secretary of State is required to establish a multilingual hotline. It's just another support that's going to be available to voters. And the Secretary and the county clerks in affected counties are required to provide minority language sample ballots, so people can kind of study them and get a sense in a language that is comfortable for them. So that was a bill that actually was it originated last session, was introduced, it was making its way through the process. And then, like, a handful of other bills that I'll touch on this evening, COVID hit and attention had to shift to trying to deal with that, the crashing economy that was happening in early 2000, right as the pandemic was kind of revving up. So a lot of things kind of went by the wayside. This was one of them. We were very pleased to see it come back and see it pass the session. The other bill in this category that I want to touch on is House Bill 1073. This is the ranked choice voting bill. This bill will give county clerks authorization and support to conduct instant runoff elections in municipalities. Instant runoff voting is the single winner version of ranked choice voting. The League's very supportive of alternatives to plurality voting, so we're really excited to see some expansions in this area. Both of these bills were passed and they've been sent to the governor, so we're just awaiting signature there. One of the other early bills was introduced pretty early on in the session that we were really excited about is the Media Literacy Implementation Bill. This is House Bill 1103, and it will require media literacy instruction in K through 12 schools. The bill directs the Colorado Department of Education to maintain online materials and a resource bank. They're also required to provide technical assistance, provide policies and procedures for implementation, best practices, and recommendations to K through 12 local education providers to support media literacy instruction. I do want to note that the materials are not a curriculum. Their use is optional. That was a very contentious point in the debates as the bill was going through the process. Use is optional, but this will be an added resource to schools to hopefully help boost education in this area. Our support for the bill was premised on our education positions, but also on the premise that the League believes that democratic government depends on informed and active participation at all levels of government. And we believe that media literacy skills will contribute to a more informed citizenry for the future. So this is something that we're excited about. We think it's a really important investment. And then I want to move along to the last category that I have listed on this slide here. Two big bills falling under the transportation realm. The first was the big transportation bill that was introduced this session. It's Senate Bill 260. It's titled The Sustainability of the Transportation System. The bill intends to raise $5.4 billion by 2032 to support transportation infrastructure projects. This revenue is going to come largely from new fees that are going to kick in July of 2022. And it's going to be on a whole range of things. It really is a wide-ranging bill. And the fees are going to apply to gasoline, retail deliveries, ride-sharing services, EV registration, electric vehicle registration, and car rentals. The money is going to get divided a few different ways. A third of it, or approximately a third of it, will go toward new transportation projects, things like highway construction, highway repair, roads and bridges, kind of the typical things we think about when we think about investments in our transportation system. Approximately 10% of the revenue generated will support improvements to public transit and bike and pedestrian paths. And the remainder of the money will support a variety of other things, including more EV charging stations, incentives to purchase electric vehicles. There's a big effort included within the bill to target and try and mitigate air pollution that obviously is generated from vehicles and highway travel. And then a portion of that money will also go to fund local government projects. So this was a really significant bill, really complex. Transportation is always a big issue in the General Assembly. It's something that can be a little bit contentious year after year. There's usually a pretty significant debate about how we're possibly going to come up with enough revenue to really take care of all the transportation and infrastructure needs that exist in Colorado. This bill doesn't quite cover the estimated cost of all that, but it does go a pretty good way to getting there. So a really significant piece of legislation. Another bill in the transportation realm that I want to make sure everyone knows about is Senate Bill 238. This bill is the Front Range Passenger Rail District bill. And essentially it's the enabling legislation for a Front Range Passenger Rail District. It's going to create a special district that is dedicated to planning, designing, developing, financing, kind of all that management and governance of a new passenger rail system. The bill describes the area that would be served by this rail system, basically going from border to border, Wyoming border to the New Mexico border on the south, mostly along I-25. And it will also connect with the RTD's proposed Fast Track's Northwest B line to Longmont. The bill lays out the governing structure, funding sources, and the powers and duties of the district. So it's really kind of putting that framework in place to help with the establishment of this rail district. Okay, moving on to the next slide. The next bill, oh, I'm sorry. One other thing I wanted to point out about the passenger rail bill. I see a point in my notes that I wanted to make sure I touched on. Just kind of getting at our position on this, and how we premised our support for the bill. Obviously our transportation position was relevant in our consideration here. The league believes that a balanced transportation system should include a variety of modes, and an appropriate mix for various areas that helps improve mobility and quality of life for residents. But support was also premised on air quality and land use positions. There's a lot of consideration in the bill given to air pollution mitigation efforts. So I wanted to point that out as well. And we were really looking to our position and belief that, or support for measures that reduce vehicular pollution, including the development of more energy efficient transportation systems. And so we felt like this was something that really kind of fell right within that. I do want to turn to one of the major environmental quality bills that we supported this session. This is House Bill 1162, Management of Plastic Products. I know this bill was something that was of big interest to a lot of our local leagues. It was a really important piece of legislation. It is another one that's actually been in work since at least last session. It was introduced in the 2020 session, and similar to a multilingual ballot, had to be abandoned in the midst of the pandemic. But we were anxiously awaiting its reintroduction this year. Unfortunately, it did pass. And this bill sets out a timeline for reduced use of plastic products in Colorado. And the various ways that this is going to be achieved is through imposing a 10-cent fee on paper and plastic bags. That will begin in January of 2023. And then beginning in January 2024, single-use plastic bags will be banned at most stores. There are some exceptions that were carved out in the bill sort of late in the process as it kind of continued on with the deliberation. But the 10-cent fee on paper bags will remain, and use of plastic will really start to get phased out. The other thing that will get phased out come January 2024 is the use of polystyrene containers. They'll be banned at restaurants. And then also in January of 2024, local governments will be allowed to impose stricter rules on plastic products within their boundaries than what this bill provides, if they choose to do so. So I know that was something that was really important to our local leagues, that local control issue. So that was something that we were pleased to see incorporated. Even though there is kind of a delayed implementation on it, it is on the horizon. Gun safety is an issue. I'm just realizing that my slides aren't quite in the right order, but bear with me here. Gun safety is an issue I definitely want to touch on because there was really a lot of activity here. There were a few bills that we opposed, and we're pleased that those didn't go anywhere. They were defeated. But we did support 6 bills that we think are really good bills that really are keeping safety kind of front and center. Some common sense measures getting put in place here. 3 of the 6 that we supported were introduced pretty early on in the session. And then the last 3 that I'll mention were introduced following the Boulder King Supers shooting. House Bill 1106 is a bill that will mandate safe storage of firearms when they're not in use. Senate Bill 78 requires firearm owners to report lost or stolen weapons within 5 days. And House Bill 1255 will require those with protection orders filed against them in connection with a domestic violence arrest file an affidavit with the court indicating the number, type, and location of firearms in their possession. As I mentioned, the next 3 bills I want to touch on were introduced later in the session. After the incident in Boulder, there was really some regrouping and I think a strong desire within within the community of Boulder, but I think the state more broadly, to really think about what we can do to try and curb the violence that we're seeing. And some really positive measures came out of that tragedy. House Bill 1298 strengthens and expands background checks. 1299 creates the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And Senate Bill 256 allows local governments to pass stricter gun laws in their localities if they choose to do so. So another bill that's really kind of getting at that local control issue. A lot of activity here. Our gun safety team was very busy, and we're really pleased with the outcome of legislation in this area. Healthcare is another area that I want to touch on, and it's another area that's always a big issue for the legislature. Similar to transportation, it comprises such a big piece of the state budget that there's always a lot of debate, about how, best to handle issues in the healthcare realm. There's certainly a lot of concerns about access to quality healthcare, and then, of course, affordability is a huge concern. So we saw a lot of legislation that we think made some headway here. And one of the major bills that I want to touch on is House Bill 1232, the Standardized Health Benefit Plan Colorado Option Bill. This was a really key bill in the healthcare realm this session. And the bill, under the bill, healthcare providers and hospitals will have until 2023 to reduce premiums by 15%. If that's not accomplished, the Commissioner of Insurance will create a standardized healthcare plan for the individual and small group market. Insurance companies will be required to offer it, and doctors and hospitals will be mandated to accept it. Our support of this bill was tied to the League program policy to support healthcare reform that provides affordability, quality, and access. And the hope here is that this bill will lead to more affordable healthcare options as it's implemented. I want to jump back on my list here on the slides to housing. Housing was another area where our affordable housing team was super busy because there was just so much activity. A lot of really positive legislation. I think it's really encouraging that this has become such a prominent issue. I think it's probably really apparent to all of us that affordable housing was a huge problem in the state prior to COVID, but housing availability and affordability is one of those issues where COVID really exacerbated the need and really exposed some of the problems that existed there. So there were some attempts to try and address that issue, and there'll be continuing attempts over the summer. Work on this will continue into the interim, but one of the key bills that our affordable housing team was following very closely and very involved in was Senate Bill 173, Rights in Residential Lease Agreements. This bill provides a whole host of protections for Colorado tenants in regard to late fees, eviction court proceedings, and rental agreements. And then more specifically, the bill will establish rules on fees charged to tenants or mobile home owners. And some of what's happening here is that the bill limits the amount of late fees that a landlord is allowed to charge. It establishes a grace period for late rent payments. It prevents a landlord from initiating eviction procedures on the sole basis of failure to pay the late fees. It requires that late fees be disclosed in the rental agreement so people know what they're getting into. And then it also establishes penalties for violation of late fee provisions. In regard to the portion of the bill that deals with eviction court procedures, the bill specifies what the court summons must contain, including a list of available legal aid and rental assistance resources. It specifies that the landlord and tenant must provide any documentation that's requested and that's related to the tenancy or the current action, so people don't have to fight for information that they need to proceed with the case. It extends the amount of time that tenants can pay back rent during the eviction process. It prohibits the court from entering a default judgment for possession before the close of business on the date when the appearance is due. And it establishes a financial penalty for landlords who illegally lock out tenants, among other things. It's a really broad bill, but some really important protections that were established here. Our support for this particular bill was premised on our position that every American family should have a decent home and a suitable living environment. And to really illustrate the need, I just wanted to share some of the research and one of the statistics provided by our affordable housing team. I think one of the key factors in consideration around this bill is that 1 in 4 Colorado renters spend more than 50% of their income on housing, which obviously is a huge financial hardship in itself. But this bill is really intended to try and mitigate the fact that what's already a financial burden can be exacerbated by excessive late fees that have historically been imposed. So this is an attempt to mitigate that. So many Colorado families and individuals are struggling with housing security right now. So it's really intended to, alleviate some of those issues. So this was a bill that we thought was really important, and we're pleased to see it passed. I also want to touch on a bill that we followed in the realm of fiscal policy. There was a lot of work and attention to our tax system, and this was one of the key bills in this area, House Bill 1311, dealing with income taxes. It really is again a broad bill and deals with a lot of things, but in general, it makes a lot of adjustments to the tax system with the intent of making it more progressive, or the effect of making it more progressive, increasing tax credits for those with the lowest incomes and decreasing deductions for those with the highest income. One of the ways that it's looking to do that, the bill is hoping to generate around $375 million in state revenue by eliminating and it also funds the child tax credit. How the bill is attempting to make things more progressive. I'm hearing something in the background, and I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm getting a message. Maybe it's
it just had to do with the recording.
Okay, good. I want to make sure I wasn't
No.
doing something wrong or disconnecting myself.
No, you're fine.
All right, moving right along to the state stimulus package and kind of the recovery effort. This was a really big focus throughout the legislative session. Obviously, there's been huge concern about the economy, in the wake of the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic, and now as we're hopefully kind of coming out of all that, there was a lot of uncertainty about where we would end up, how bad things would get, what a rebound would look like. And that picture has become much more clear. And we've really just kind of like swung wildly from, a year ago, thinking that, we were going to be in the midst of a terrible recession to, suddenly realizing that there's much more money available in the budget than anyone thought possible. It's just really been kind of all over the place, and so it's made the state budgeting process really difficult. And the fact that we're in a much better budget place than anticipated is a great thing, but there's obviously been a lot of pain along the way, and the economic recovery has also been really uneven. There are certain sectors that are obviously suffering much more than others. The rebound there is, much slower to take hold. And then there's certain segments of the population that have been hit much harder. Low-wage workers are recovering at a much slower pace than higher earners. So there's really a lot that the state needs to do to ensure that everyone is being brought along and that we actually do get to a place where, the entire state is on solid footing again. So one of the things that, was done, in response to all this, in response to the economic hardships that were created by the pandemic, is the state stimulus plan. The General Assembly developed an $800 million stimulus package. It's known as the Colorado Recovery Plan. And the package is really broad in the things that it's attempting to do. It really is kind of trying to touch on all regions of Colorado to provide broad support for people that have been impacted throughout the state, and really, kind of taking a broad approach to, the different industries that need to be built up to ensure positive growth going forward. Some of the focus areas of the stimulus package include our state's infrastructure. There are measures to support rural communities and rural economic development, of course, support for education, and a lot of different efforts to boost job creation. The package included approximately 40 individual bills that address a variety of things, including mental health support, tax relief for restaurants, people working in the service industry, or businesses that are service oriented, small business support. These are just to name a few. But the state spending allocations were intended to complement funding allocations in regard to the money that was received from the federal government through the federal stimulus package. So there was a lot of thought given to kind of how to, how to fit the puzzle pieces together, so to speak, to really leverage funds and try and maximize use of the money that was available. Colorado is going to be receiving $3.8 billion under the American Rescue Plan. That's the federal stimulus plan. I'm sure everyone is aware. And similar to the state stimulus package, the money is really aimed at helping states recover from the economic crisis that resulted from the pandemic, and to really kind of help them get their economies moving again. The trick of it all is that with such significant one-time funding coming in, there's just really a lot of decisions to be made about how it's best spent, what makes sense given the fact that this is not an ongoing revenue stream. There's been a real focus on, what are smart investments that can be pretty time limited, either one time or, something that can be supported in a more time limited way. Infrastructure investments that can kind of be kickstarted by this money. So there's just really a lot that needed to be contemplated as the state was trying to figure out how best to allocate this money. And then, of course, they were trying to figure out how to, complement the state funding in a way that, would really leverage all the money that was available. Part of the decision-making process in regard to the funding allocation was the Build Back Stronger listening sessions that were conducted throughout the state. They were designed to get community input on needs and priorities so the state could channel federal stimulus dollars to community-specific needs. I don't know if anyone had the opportunity to participate in them, but they did take place in all regions of the state. And I think you can still access the recordings by going to the state's Build Back Better website. But some of the key community priorities that emerged from those conversations were housing and behavioral health. I have been told that that was really something that was very consistent, from one community to another. Those are concerns that exist throughout the state. And we're already seeing money channeled to provide support in both of these areas. The legislators will need to continue to make decisions about funding allocations during the interim. That's something that a lot of attention will need to be paid to, over the coming months. And on the slide here, you can see I provided a link to the list of the interim committees. You can go on there and access their schedules and follow those proceedings if you're interested. We'll make sure that the slides are available to you and you can access the schedules through that link. The funding allocation framework was established through Senate Bill 288. It was titled the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 Cash Fund. As the name implies, the bill creates a cash fund and transfers federal funding the state receives pursuant to the American Rescue Plan into the fund. Funds have to be expended or obligated by 2024, and obligated funds must be spent by 2026. Any unspent or unobligated funds remaining by December 2024 will be transferred to the State Unemployment Compensation Fund. And allocations will be held in the fund until they're transferred by separate legislation. So some of the planned allocations that are, have been made to date include $1 billion to strengthen the state budget, $300 million for ongoing COVID response, $400 million for affordable housing and efforts to promote home ownership, $400 million toward behavioral health programs, $800 million for economic recovery, and $400 million for transportation infrastructure, parks, and agriculture. So with that, I will stop talking. I know I think I went a little beyond my time. We do want to open things up for questions and discussion. And because I have talked for a little bit too long, I also want to note that please feel free to reach out to me by email or phone anytime if there's anything that I can discuss in more depth or answer questions. I'll stop sharing my screen now so we can see each other better. So any discussion or questions for Toni and I?
Can I just jump in and ask a question?
Please do, yes.
Okay, I live in Colorado Springs, and so far it's very clear that our mayor is not interested in having any discussions about how our rescue money is spent. 76 million is coming to the Springs. I'm just wondering around the state from other leagues, if in Denver, is the mayor talking about having meetings to discuss the money that's coming specifically to Denver or to Pueblo or to Fort Collins? Is it normal that other communities are having those kinds of discussions on how the stimulus money should be spent?
I haven't heard any conversations at all. Anybody else?
This is Jerry. The only thing I could contribute at this point would be a conversation with the mayor of Centennial, who said they're still trying to figure out exactly what the parameters are on where it can be or cannot be spent. So I think they're still in that quasi state where they're trying to figure things out.
Thanks.
I do see a question from Trish in the chat asking about the time frame for the interim session. The interim is basically just referring to the time period that the legislature is not in session. Although right now, when the session first ends, there's sometimes a little bit of a lull, and we'll really start to see the interim committee schedule kick into gear later in the summer and into the fall. So if you're interested in following any of the interim committees, you just kind of check back in their calendar and you'll start to see when their meeting schedule is. I am not sure if they have dates posted yet. If not, you will see those eventually. You just kind of have to check back.
So Andrea, can you give us a list, or do you know off the top of your head what some of the interim committees are?
Let's see. I had it pulled up earlier and I don't think I have it up anymore, but I can get there quickly. Well, maybe I can get there quickly.
Well, maybe this could just be passed along with the slides and things.
And I'll put the link here, and I did pull it up. I'll put the link in the chat as well. So it's easily available.
You
But
can follow the interim committees too. So, you know, and they'll be online in some form. I don't know if they'll be video, but they will be audio.
well, and that's something that I did mean to mention. I think if there's been some good coming out of all the disruption associated with the pandemic in terms of, you know, the legislative process and how all that plays out, I think the fact that there has been an expansion of remote testimony, you know, anyone can do it now, and that wasn't the case prior to the pandemic. So in terms of, you know, the ability to participate from a distance, you know, just increased transparency, that sort of thing, that's been really good, and hopefully that will remain in place going forward.
And that triggers another thought. Do we have the steps that you have to take to do online testimony?
That's actually another link that I can put here in the chat. So there's a link on the General Assembly website that will give you information on public testimony options. And when you go to that page, it's this link that I just put in there. You can submit written testimony, you can sign up to testify in person, or you can just listen. And then as you select what option you're interested in, it'll sort of walk you through the process. You will need to have WebEx downloaded onto your computer if you plan to testify. But otherwise, it's pretty easy to do. It's pretty intuitive, and it'll kind of walk you through the steps. But again, if there's questions around that, or if anybody gets stuck, please feel free to reach out.
And WebEx is the state's Zoom. It's
Yes.
what we use.
Let's see, I see a question in the chat about the US Treasury guidelines for the federal stimulus spending. Will other leagues push their local governments to have discussions similar to those that Governor Polis held throughout the state? Any feedback on that, or anything underway that people know of? Maybe not. I can't say that I've heard anything along those lines.
Well, the witching hour of 6:30 is here. And if there are no more pressing questions, we could close up and everybody can go ahead and enjoy the rest of the evening. Do you have some final words, Andrea?
The only thing that I want to say, thank you all for joining in. It's great to see so many people engaged and interested in the work that LAC has done this year. And if there are any questions, please reach out. But I also just wanted to thank the members of LAC because they work really, really hard. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work too. So they're really dedicated, and I think they have done some fabulous work this session.
Yes, indeed.
You're here.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and enjoy the heat.
Bye, everyone.